Good morning, everyone. This is DLT Fridays. As warned, as advised, this is the highest energy show in crypto. Why? Besides for the fact that I have some excellent green tea, because I get to do the show with my good buddy, James Haft from PALcapital. James, love you, buddy. I love you so much that I'm up at 6 a.m. in the morning doing the show. Hello, everyone from beautiful, not sunny Los Angeles. It will be sunny soon. And today, look over my shoulder, the other shoulder. We have a fantastic show. It's the impact of avatars and AI. AI, of course, being artificial intelligence. And we have two fantastic guests, both of whom I believe were arranged by James and our buddies at James, and whom I'm happy to meet. We have Cristina Dolan, we have Arif, and I'm going to just do micro introduction of myself. Gordon Einstein. I'm an attorney, believe it or not. All I do is crypto and blockchain law, but it's not about me. It's all about James. No, it's not even all about James, but we'll let James introduce himself next, and then we'll give a longer, proper introduction to our guests and jump right in. So James, at my energy level, come on, buddy. Good morning.
Actually, thank you, Gordon. And the thing I love about you most, Gordon, is that you make me look like I'm Zen, which is very hard to do.
That is extremely hard. I think I'll last about 2 minutes. Go.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I'm allowed to fool myself, aren't I? So, guys, I'm really happy to have everyone here today. It's going to be a really interesting show. Our guests are preeminent experts who have spent years focusing on avatars and AI and the impact on our communities, on society, on politics, on economics. There's just so many different layers that these technologies impact. One of my theories, the guys out there that know me know that I talk about the Neil Stephenson concept that we're all going to have avatars, and those avatars are going to have digital wallets, and those digital wallets are going to hold information and value simultaneously. They're going to be controlled by AI. They're going to be run by algorithms, and they're going to take over parts of our lives and represent us in ways where which have never been possible before. The wealthy have always been able to have these avatars. They've been able to have a manager in Switzerland or Panama who took care of their business, who chose the jurisdictions that they could behave in, who chose the tax regimes that they had to work with by adding a layer of anonymity and external control to their activities, both financial, political, and otherwise. And these new technologies are going to give us the ability to have individuals and democratize that ability, where you'll be able to now be represented and act in ways where you'll be able to choose your jurisdictions, and you'll be able to choose what your character is and which parts of your personality you choose to show, and the veracity of that information that we're talking about, which I think will end up becoming the core part of this conversation. We're lucky to have with us today Cristina Dolan. Cristina is a legend in the blockchain world, in the AI world. She came from MIT Media Lab and now has insideCHAINS and really is an amazing focus on data and AI. And we have Arif and Alethea, who I met at Davos a short year ago. And his company, as you'll see, is the preeminent bleeding edge of deep fakes and all the interesting and scary aspects that adds to our community. Cristina, talk to us about why data, why AI?
Well, I actually think that data is the next wave of innovation. It changes business models like the Airbnb, Uber scenarios. You need it in supply chains, ESG. I mean, you can't be compliant. You were just in Davos, right? The 17 sustainability goals. It's powering every part of our business. Security, everything we do is being powered by data, and it's creating new business models. And pertinent to this conversation, if you think about what's happened in e-commerce during this whole COVID crisis, the ability to look up product information and provide customer service and delivery and supply chains and provenance, security, all of these things are driven by data, right? And they're in silos, and they have to be pulled in and analyzed, and then being able to make decisions on the spot. And hopefully this technology will be used to be able to pull that together and have this as a skin that presents this in a humanistic way that you can interact with in order to improve like product delivery or information, right?
So, but at what point in your life did this epiphany occur?
Let me jump in for a second. The way I like to frame this, and I'm just gonna claim it, is Wolverine has a backstory, the origin tale. I don't necessarily want, like James said earlier, we don't necessarily want the resume, but I love personally knowing how people get into this stuff because I think it's inspirational to me and people who watch. So what is your origin tale? If Marvel were presented.
So I've actually built companies. I was co-founder of a company I took public. I've been an engineer and have 3 degrees in engineering. But my epiphany came as a child when I was watching movies like, Star Trek, and all the women were wearing these cool little outfits, and the people who really understood technology were the smart people, right? And they traveled to faraway planets. I mean, so I went to an all-girls school, Convent of the Sacred Heart, and the nuns said to me, "Oh my gosh, like, why would you want that life?" I'm like, "It's so cool." But what's interesting is I headed up technology for Hearst and Disney at the beginning of the sort of online internet, building websites, and people were thinking like, "Why would you do that?" Then I went to Oracle, headed up e-commerce, co-founded a company in the internet, internet was dial-up, so my kids laugh at me. Then I was head of a machine learning AI company spun out of MIT, and then I was in the fintech space around data for over a decade, which is how I got into blockchain and started a variety of different companies in the fintech, insurtech. I have a company in Spain that's working in the health tech space and doing a lot of work with COVID. So, and now I'm working with a cybersecurity company, which I've been working on with an area I've been working on for a number of years because protecting data has become even more important. And writing a book on data right now as well, because it's powering new business models. You have to secure your supply chains. It's all data driven. You have to have the ESG, the sustainability goals. All this is data, and it's all in siloed systems.
Actually, pause for a second, because it's funny. A friend just explained ESG to me, and I think it's reasonably well known, but we do have an international audience. So could you dive that for a moment?
Those are the sustainability goals, and they've sort of evolved over time to become much more important. But ESG has the environmental goals, but the governance is the G, right? And that has to do with how companies are run, shareholders. So when you look at these data points, what they're able to provide is some insights on how companies are run, right? And so they're like another signal that financial people look at in order to figure out if a company is being run or being successful. So you look at companies like Bear Stearns, which had very bad ESG ratings. You start to realize that there is a correlation. So these data points are all over the place, and they power very interesting new business models. And so, it's an exciting area. I think that's where the new wave of value is going to be created. But keep in mind, blockchain, cryptographic information, that's part of FIDO, the new standard. The company I'm working with, Cryonic, is got this new standard for FIDO, right? So these are all things that have evolved from these technologies: blockchain, crypto, data. I mean, it's all tied together.
So did you say Bear Stearns?
Yeah, Bear Stearns actually had a bad ESG rating.
I think we should leave my former firms out of this. All right.
James was in no way responsible for this, and if any photos you have, those were deep fakes. They were just early.
Any resemblance was merely coincidental.
Yeah.
So Arif, great lead-in for you. I have been so amazed following your progress, mostly through Telegram and social media, to watch how you've moved intellectually and philosophically, and then as a product around the deep fake concept. How did this become? First of all, what is a deep fake, and why did it become so interesting to you?
Yeah, thanks, James, and I really love the energy everyone's bringing in. I'll try and keep it up, but
wake up!
Because of my slight introversion, I may just dive into like some of the.
I'll stimulate you. Come on, let's go. Deepfakes, lay it on us.
All right. No, I think deepfakes broadly just synthetic media, anything that is generated by a machine, AI generated media that requires some of the data that Cristina was talking about to train on. But the data that is shown is really almost a mirror image, or not exactly. It's so accurate, it's so deceptively accurate that a person is fooled into thinking about it, that this is real. Now, deepfakes have a negative connotation. The broader industry that's shaping up around machine-generated content or AI-generated content is being termed synthetic media, in the same way that you'd think of like synthetic food, like synthetic biology. You have fake meat now, right? So like, and that tastes just as good as the real thing. So synthetic media is almost a good analogy to describe what's happening in this space. So that's for the description of how it is. And really, for me, how I got started into this, the origin story, and that Wolverine image is evocative because, as a kid, I used to read the comic books and see
it's
that,
meant to be
this
my
guy
friend.
has this complex history of like
Yeah.
being bred in a giant test tube and like, then being made into a war machine. And really the subtlety of his how people can implant ideas into his consciousness and his ability to recover. And I'll come back to why that's important as well, because there are certain things here that struck me as an interesting parallel to the way the industry is evolving. So I grew up in Singapore, and in Singapore there is a very clear narrative, or at least there's a straightforward narrative and understanding of what reality is, right? And so it is it has a political, socioeconomic system that's functional, that works. It's a young country that's evolving its democratic institutions. It has a press that writes about things as accurately as it can be, and there is an arbiter of the truth, which is the state. So the state does have a heavy hand, but it does interfere and intervene in the best way possible, a benevolent sort of
I'm sorry, you're talking about
authoritarian state, right?
You're talking about the way things are, or the way they should be, or I missed that.
The way things were in Singapore, at least for me when I was there.
Okay, got it, fine.
No,
which by definition in Singapore is perfect.
Yeah. Singapore, is like, the caricature in the West, as I discovered later, hanging around some of these diplomats in Washington, D.C. was just that, it's Disneyland with the death penalty, right? Like very, very strict, extremely perfect, great country, but to do business, but don't break the law. And I think to a certain degree,
gum in the subway.
That's somewhat of an unfair caricature because it's a developing country and I love it a lot. I think the main thing that when I moved to the US, I realized very quickly the difference and the distinct challenges that America has, because it has centered its institutions on freedom, right? Freedom and the ability of the individual to express itself. So what you have today, or at least when I came here in 2016, I realized that there were really two different realities people were embodying. And that split is quite alive today. That reality is really being held by two different. It's two different worlds that exist in the same world, and it's fascinating because the challenge here is that how do you then reconcile realities when people can have one reality regarding COVID or any of the concerns about health, and then other people who understand it and say that this is a major challenge for health and we need to act right now, right? So if you look at some of these critical events that have occurred in the past year, they really show the cracks and fissures. And I think actually the value of a society questioning itself, questioning the narratives, is extremely, extremely important. And this is where deepfakes sort of come in, which is in this very fragile information ecosystem, right? Do you really want to introduce synthetic AI generated media, right? And the unique thing about the US, which is why it's possible here and not possible in China. Like in China, if you put Xi Jinping next to Winnie the Pooh, you spend a night in jail, right? Or maybe more things happen to you there, right? But in the US, you can have a South Park episode, and the creators of South Park create a complete deepfake show, which I recommend all the audience watch, called Sassy Justice, right? And Sassy Justice is a satirical production which shows Donald Trump as an interviewer with his own personality that's completely different from the Donald Trump as a president that we know. So I think that if I just contextualize this a bit more, having moved from the East to now the West, I started seeing the value of communication and freedom. And within that ecosystem, there is an opportunity for new technologies to emerge, which is why technologies like synthetic media present a tremendous opportunity to impact our lives and add humor and joy and allow people to create synthetic avatars and identities, but then at the same time also still harm the existing information ecosystem, right? So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we need to really understand like what is the context we're operating in, right? And if we were in much more stricter rules, certainly deepfakes would be thrown out the door, right? Like, And there are certain deepfakes that should be regulated and thrown out the door, like deepfake porn should not be allowed, for example, where you take someone's identity without their consent, right? So that's how I think about the early stages and a little bit about my origin story and passion in this industry.
Well, it's interesting. So you talk there about, deepfake porn and whether it should and shouldn't be. And I think that the ethical aspects we need to get into, who defines what's right and wrong and what people should use technology for. And I think that that's an area that Christina's been paying attention to, right? In terms of, what are the dangers and how do you protect yourself? So Cristina, as you've been working with data and with identity and with protecting yourself, what have you seen as trends and what are the dangers and what are the solutions? So how do people help protect themselves?
So it's no surprise that during this COVID crisis, there's been a tremendous amount of fraud that's been happening, especially, for example, in the transactional banking side, and a lot of it is from phishing, et cetera. But as banks have tried to move towards utilizing interactions with people that they believe are real people as some mechanism by which to possibly overcome things like, phishing attempts. These types of technologies can be an issue. And so FIDO is a new standard that came out, which Microsoft and all the tech companies use. It works with the platforms natively, and a lot of financial institutions are using that, right? So the ability.
Sorry, Cristina, just real quick, it's a sort of corporate agreed upon standard, or is it true ISO standard, or what's the status?
It's basically a consortium called FIDO, FIDO, and everybody's basically come together, and it's based on a cryptographic hash of a bunch of different pieces of information, and they call it passwordless, but it's not really passwordless because you need a lot of different components, right? So the one company I'm working with, Cryonic, actually uses a signature, which actually offers a biometrics, but also can use thumbprints, a physical device. So you're combining a bunch of different pieces of information in order to be able to sign that and then be able to send that signature over without revealing the biometrics that you're sending over, right? So these things become even more important. And I know James before and I were having an argument that if the data input is fake and somehow or other you're able to enter, provide fake information, then you're really, sidestepping the whole thing. But I think it's becoming even more important to have mechanisms, and the fact that our country doesn't even have a unified identity system like the ones that are popping up in different countries in Europe means that it becomes even more difficult to tie that into your identity in a way that can be used for things like voting or a variety of different things, which I know is there's a lot of controversy around that. But when it comes to identity, for those of us who have had our phones ported 3 times in an attempt to get stupid people that think that we have crypto on a phone, like we're not that stupid. But I did get my.
Some of us were. Slow admit.
Oh, okay. Well, I after a while, you come to conclude.
It was 2 years ago, and that ship has sailed.
Yes. So. Wow. So identity in terms of your visual representation is now not a good measure for verifying someone's presence, right? And so you're now going to have to rely on a variety of different things combined and use this cryptographic capability that sort of has evolved and become more sophisticated through crypto and blockchain, and utilizes as a mechanism to sort of bypass these deep fakes on many levels. Because as you pointed out, you could replicate the iris, but then maybe you can use things like a signature verification through the biometrics of how you hold the pen and sign, which is what Cryonic is using. And there's a whole bunch of other mechanisms that can be used from a security perspective.
So,
interesting.
Arif, when you talk about what's the genesis of a deep fake, where do you start?
Yeah, that's well, from a creative standpoint,
yeah,
you typically start with an idea. So. And then you need some data to train your deepfake on, right? So let's say if I wanted to create a deepfake of James, right? And the line between a deepfake and a synthetic version of him it's very fine, right? So I'll use the word synthetic because deepfake implies no.
I'm sorry, isn't just the deepfake a matter of intent? Isn't it really the same technology no matter what?
Yeah, it is the same underlying tech, but how would I put this? It's like sending an email. You can send an email with a genuine business proposition, or you can send tremendous amounts of spam, right? So like
That's what I'm getting at. Isn't it the intent of what you're doing?
yeah, so the language that deepfakes sometimes evoke is language that's anchored in a lack of consent. So if I talk about a deepfake of James, it's almost as if he didn't have a say in that creation process. Versus if I say like a synthetic version of him or synthetic avatar, that seems to be the idea or the presupposition that he has sort of consented to his identity being duplicated, right?
Oh, that's sorry. Even if the avatar is improvising, not exactly saying what he would have said, if he was kind of consenting in the process of creating that thing, that's not quite a deep fake.
Yeah, I think
Interesting.
fundamentally, right? If James is involved in the decision, and he has given consent for himself to create an avatar, and he has given consent for himself to be deepfaked or shown in different movie clips, whatever he would like, as long as he is at the center of the decision-making process, and he allows that data to then he allows the creation of that content. I call that a synthetic version of him, right? But then if it is somewhat malicious, I often hear the term deepfake, right? So like if somebody did not ask James consent and then does it without his permission, and suddenly James is appearing in many different panels, shilling different versions of coins that he may not like, right? So like that might be a very, very different proposition, and that would be a deepfake for me.
James, let me run with something for a minute, and then I'm gonna hand it back to you. Just give me a little bit of rope, okay? I don't know if you guys all saw it, but Dave Chappelle came out with an Instagram post recently where he was talking about when he was a young comedian, he signed over all the right to the Chappelle Show to Comedy Central. And now he's on Netflix, and he asked Netflix to no longer show that show. And he was not alleging that Comedy Central was racist to him. He was not alleging that they breached any contract. He was kind of just unhappy with how the way the industry treats young comedians. What you just said, or what you just said made me think that in future, I can easily see contracts where we get the use of your likeness and your comedic style to create avatars of you. And can you imagine that the Chappelle Show was still running without Dave Chappelle, with a synthetic Chappelle? I mean, why not? We're not that far away from natural language processing and images that can do that.
But also, we're going to have, just as Arif was talking before about the show with Trump, we're going to start to have avatars that have personalities and styles and followings that aren't even people, that are just synthetic people.
And James, you've been fascinating this forever. You always talk about Neil Stephenson and Cryptonomicon and Snow. I'm sorry, one more time.
Snow Crash, man.
And you've inspired me with this. So let me hand it back to you. But I just want the thing that the weirdest Chappelle reference popped into my head as Arif was speaking. It was like, wow. Okay, but go ahead, please.
So Arif, I come to you.
Arif, I'm sorry.
So by the way, everyone, this is not James. This is actually synthetic me. We weren't going to tell you until after the show. That's why I sound so intelligent, eloquent today. Arif, talk to me. I come to you and I want to do something. We have an idea. I have an idea. I want to do a show host that does DLT Fridays, right? What happens?
Yeah, so I think first, if that show host is you, and if that's a duplicate copy of you have training data, right? So you have enough data of yourself. And so this is a part where the technology has evolved fairly rapidly in the past 2 years or so. When I first started looking at the problem, you'd need 15 hours of video content to create a really accurate duplicate of you, right? Like a synthetic double. But today, what Alethea AI can do is we're able to use a single high fidelity image and create that character and bring it to life. That means we've solved the training data problem. I don't need a ton of training data to create a synthetic character. What this means is that, and we're very careful about thinking about how to release this feature. It's just a matter of identity and consent, as you say. But the moment you have a single high fidelity image, you can bring that character to life. And then you want to add the character's voice to it, which requires an element of voice cloning, which is also possible today. But what's missing really, and the key link that only occurred in the past year or so, and that's why this is some of the most interesting cutting edge technology that I like to play with, is OpenAI's GPT-3 really has sort of, pushed us to reimagine what NLP and what AI really is capable of when given a good prompt and given a good design, right? So some of the tests we've done and some of the tests we've seen publicly of GPT-3 have shown that you can really recreate a person's words and language structure. There are some mistakes that it, of course, makes given its early iteration, and I'm not overhyping it in any way, but the fact that I can take someone's language structure and replicate it is, to Gordon's point, when it comes to Dave Chappelle, it really opens up the door as to the existence of a person beyond their lifespan, right? Or even for comedy contracts or any agreed institution, what if you had to give up a corpus of your work to a corporation, and they could then train AI models on it and then create new works based on that? So today, for example, there's a wonderful site I encourage people to check out. I think it's Gordon.net, and she has what the site has is
Say that slower. Say that's a
Or
Gordon.
put it in the chat. It sounded like
Yeah.
Gordon.net.
yeah, I'll send it out.
I thought I was the avatar. Wait a minute, Gordon.
let me send it out. It's a great site just to have a look at. Have a look at the fan fiction being generated on Harry Potter, right? Using GPT-3. It's fascinating because you're using existing training data. And if you go on TikTok or any of the channels today, you'll realize there are entire fan fiction universes where, DC, Marvel Comics, Wolverine, people are dressing up as these characters that they love to embody, right? These characters exist in these characters exist in our imagination. But then what if now you could write as if that story was naturally and organically progressing? And GPT-3 has opened that door up, and only in the past year or so, right? So if you combine all the visual elements, the audio elements, plus the knowledge engine that comes from NLP, you then come to the thesis of like a horrible Black Mirror episode, or you actually come to a somewhat positive scenario where the individual is at the center of this decision-making process and is in charge of how their data is being used, which is why actually Christina's work is quite fascinating and interesting to me as well.
So Christina, what scares you about what he just said?
Well, what scares me from an identity perspective, so I think there's a very positive side to this, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. What scares me is that you've now created these sort of digital replicas that are not tied into sort of a, one of these sophisticated cryptographic identity mechanisms by which you can verify through some sort of a handshake that that's actually you and not somebody else, right? But I actually do think that there's a very positive side of this. I mean, I'm looking at e-commerce and what's happened in e-commerce, and Best Buy had the best quarter ever, and like I look at my refrigerator broke, and I had one of these horrific experiences, and I'm from New York, so you can imagine I gave them hell and called 100 times and was on hold for like 2 hours. So I finally get somebody to my home, and I noticed they have a very sophisticated system by which to look up the parts because it was like this broken part. But I then complained, well, my refrigerator doesn't really make ice as often. And so he immediately says to me, oh, most people don't recognize that the refrigerator has to be at a certain temperature to create a lot of ice. And if it's between these two temperatures, it creates a lot of ice, but freezes, whatever. And so I thought to myself, wow, if you had just told me that the 100 times that I've tried to call, I would have been a much happier customer, right? So that customer journey, and we talk about that a lot in marketing, is about all those little pain points and touch points. But your interactions are at a point.
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in because that was a fascinating term, the customer journey.
Yeah, the customer journey.
Explain like I'm 5.
Okay, so customer journeys are very big in marketing now, and it's sort of this design-centric mechanism because everything isn't on an interface anymore. Your journey might be at the store. It might be, on the phone, on your, through a variety of different experiences. So you have to think about how your customer actually travels through time and has issues and problems, right? And so it's not just at that end point where I have somebody on the phone and I have this refrigerator, and yet I have zero ability to interact and get that information. So the ability to have that, obviously, Arif and I had talked before, you need a tremendous amount of data to be able to train that. But if you can do it quickly and then have somebody talk you through, hey, stupid, like if your refrigerator freezer isn't below a certain temperature, it's not going to make ice, right? Because, it requires a certain temperature for it to work. So these types of experiences at a time where you want to like help the customer at a time when they want to buy products, these would be very valuable, but there's a lot of data underneath that needs to be pulled together from a variety of different silos and then converted into either a visual format or a format that meets that particular point in the journey and interacts with you in some way that will allow you to have a great experience. And so I think that this visual medium is actually very helpful there. Unfortunately, the bots that you have today working on these sites cannot help you, cannot compute, sorry, click, because that product is part of the special services. You paid a lot more money than the average person. And so your smart Samsung refrigerator that's supposed to be like, connected to the internet and telling you everything actually pretty stupid. And it does nothing except, try to sell you stuff. So it is an actual Samsung refrigerator. So I have to say, even though they have their bot, the customer experience there on that journey was, when I thought about my entire journey and all the ways that could be fixed, there were a lot of mechanisms, but there's tremendous amount of siloed data in a variety of different systems, which even Best Buy doesn't have access to, that could have been used to service me better and then presented to me at the end of this journey in this particular interface that I was using.
And Arif, how do you worry about whether what you're doing is a activity for the good, or whether or is this the beginning of the end? What's the feeling you have when you're working on this stuff?
Yeah, I think the main challenge is that if we look at existing systems, they really have abstracted the individual out of the choice. So, there's as Cristina was sharing a little bit about the marketing touch points that companies have, the customer journey. Like we are customers from the day we were born and the day we die, right? Like that's the touch point for a lot of brands to get into our heads and
Isn't that why we were born? Didn't you just see the Matrix?
To just be customers, right? So and you should honor thy customer, right? Like the maxim goes, right? So we should, the way we're centered as a society seems to really abstract away the individual's will and make it part of like a collective group of just segmented customers. And I think that is a societal level problem that we can't fix right now. What I found was that if we use synthetic media properly, we can sort of pierce the veil about our reality and tell alternative stories, right? So there are some unique ways and methods. If we look at the first instance that was really well done in Hollywood a couple of years back was when Forrest Gump, sorry?
Oh, when Forrest Gump is with Kennedy.
Forrest Gump was with Nixon or Kennedy, I can't remember, yeah. But like how real that scene is, right? So you can imagine like this technology now, is it because
I just gotta jump in. It was Kennedy because he made the comment afterwards, like a few years later, someone shot that nice man. I remember the scene. It was pretty poignant.
Yeah. No, I mean the challenge is just if you can create anything centered around the individual's consent and allow an individual to express creatively their abilities, I think you direct and nudge this technology in the right direction. But if everything orients towards mega corporations and governments, that's essentially where the thesis on the blockchain is quite interesting and powerful, because that element of decentralization actually means the decentralization of power, but the centralization of agency and free will to the individual, right? And so for me, that is the operating thesis that we try and operate on. So we like satire, we like use cases where we can tell alternative stories, but certainly we stay away from any sort of work that's oriented around harming a democracy, right? So it's really valuable to label the synthetic media you create, so have a clear label that this is AI generated. You can do other things like have a cryptographic hash that connects and shows that the provenance of this video is manipulated, right? So there are many ways to make sure that you can do this safely. I'd just akin it to like a technology like as neutral as the email, where you want people to be able to communicate with it and do new art with it and enable people to tell new stories that empower them, but you also don't want it to harm it.
Where's the line? Like, I think everyone, Christina's keeping it real with her background, I think, but none of us are. James, I don't think always has that exact same power. Arif, I don't think you're in outer space.
It's weird. No, I figured it out because I talked to Arif. That actually follows me everywhere I go.
Yeah, well, well done. So, I mean, it's not offensive because we kind of know that's not real. But James, your background,
nobody knows what it means, which is great.
Well, your background could be real. I mean, it's not inherently wrong. You could have painted that on your wall. So, part of this deepfake and AI makes me wonder. AI, we always think it's like just over the next hill, but the usual comment I hear is just it's seeping into our everyday life. It's just getting good and gradual, so that what we used to think was the AI is just basic programming. What would I say? Because AI, we kind of, I think it's this holy grail kind of thing. It's everyday manifestations we just accept and don't recognize it as AI because we always think it's something magical. I wonder if with these avatars and these deepfakes and these synthetic personalities, they're just going to seep into our lives like this backgrounds and Zoom seep into our lives. And we don't really think that this is artificial. We don't think this is deceptive. But, truth is, it's not real.
But I think it's one of the dangers. I think you're exactly right. Arif, when this deepfake idea, it's as Gordon is saying, it's dangerous, right? So when Cristina was talking before about Fido, and Cristina, don't get mad at me, and I'm glad we're about 210 miles away before I say this. But you're talking about Fido, and then you're bringing up Microsoft and Google, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, let me barf now, right? I can't wait for them to solve the problems of my security and my privacy, and because who has my best interest at heart more than them? I'm really, I'm a decentralist. I think Arif mentioned the same thing. I know you are too, Cristina, and Gordon. So I would much rather see the solution be the crowdsourced, and that you demand there to be this certification, this tethering to a blockchain, to a certainty, to truth without trusting somehow, without having Microsoft involved in a crowdsourced way. Is that possible? Can we get there?
Well, I just wanted to point out that Microsoft is not leading this. I mean, it's a big, huge consortium, and there's a lot of startups and young companies that have all come together to create this standard, right? And it's based on, cryptographic signature, right? So it was inspired by that, and it's been adopted by financial institutions. So when I say that these organizations utilize it, I mean, they basically catch that signature through a variety of different standards that they utilize on their platforms. And just to add to that, when Google is having a lot of problems internally with all this phishing, and so they gave all their employees a FIDO-based key, which enabled them to be able to reduce that very significantly, right? So it's a solution to a problem that's based on cryptography, but I don't think that security needs to have a decentralized blockchain that replicates information everywhere, right? Because you're just using the technology as a verification mechanism, not necessarily as...
Google just fired their leading AI researcher because they didn't like
Why? I missed that. What happened?
Google fired their leading AI researcher because the logical extension of her concepts was not beneficial to Google's business model, and internally, Google's scientific community is very vocally expressing their displeasure with Google's censorship of this woman whose name I've forgotten, but who.
See, it works if you.
No, but so I hear you, but I'm still really a decentralist at heart, and I trust the crowd more than I trust corporations. Mm-hmm. And I trust people who have the same self-interest as me more than I trust centralized organizations or authorities. So is it possible that we could get to the point where we as a crowd could demand some sort of certification that's open source that we could get around? Like, this is like the vacciners, the vaxxers, the same guys. It's the same concept. of, do I trust the vaccine and am I being told the truth? How do we get to the point where I can see something and know that it's not obfuscation, that it's not, an attempt to alter my thought by altering my perception of truth, in the presentation? Cristina, is that something you've been thinking about?
Well, obviously, since you and I have had our issues with phone, SIM cards, and I actually was a co-founder of an insurtech company that offered cyber insurance, and I worked with an Israeli company and cyber risk assessment. So it's an area I think a lot about, right? Because it pertains to data and protecting data. And while there are, NIST and ISO and all these mechanisms by which to look at all these various variables and networks and how people and organizations are trained, I think that one of the biggest issues in cybersecurity is the end user and securing the end user, because that's where most of the mistakes happen. And phishing is just an example of that, right? But even in the consumer space, you have like all those fake calls saying, oh, we're Amazon, give us your credentials and log into the site and we'll put some, malware on your machine and steal everything from you, because they're telling you that your account has been compromised, and people actually go through this whole process and get their accounts compromised. And so the end user is the biggest issue, right? So having this cryptographic capability where you lock a bunch of different variables into a signature and utilize that and have that accepted, or creating that as a identity hash that can't be in some way faked, because that signature is something that you read as something's been authorized or not authorized, is probably the best mechanism that we have right now, right? But putting your password into a centralized database in some place where you're not even sure that they've actually encrypted it, which is something that still happens today, is not the way to go. You need a decentralized mechanism by which you utilize cryptography in some way to bundle a bunch of pieces of information that you only know, and then you're able to sign things off. Then you just need the rest of that ecosystem to accept that signature in such a way as being authentic, and that's part of the puzzle. So you need, not only do you have to create this, you want people on the other side to have a mechanism by which to accept that, so that they can verify those signatures. But I actually think there's a lot of positive stuff that you can actually do with this type of technology. So obviously a big advocate of cybersecurity because of being an engineer in a journey, and I believe that protecting data and identity is really critical to where the world is moving towards. But I actually think that the ability to be able to offer people better experiences in terms of information and interaction has tremendous amount of value. Just think about it. If I'd known about the refrigerator issue, if I'd had a better interaction along that journey, because the bot is too stupid. So you need the data that feeds the avatar, but if you could have a better experience, the guy who came to repair the refrigerator had a fabulous interface on his device in terms of all of the parts and checking this, and then he ordered his little parts. Great interface for him, but sucky one for me. And I could have done a lot on my own before he actually arrived to fix some aspects of my customer experience. So, and that's all about data and being able to access that data, understanding these customer experiences with your products and with your services, and being able to present them in a way that can be consumed or understood by a grandmother as well as my children, right?
Makes sense. Well, let me ask you, when we talk about the positive impacts, one thing that occurred to my mind when we were talking about synthetic media as opposed to deepfake is, I love languages, but I struggle learning languages. To have a tutor that's synthetic media that can speak natural language and interact with me at somewhere near my ability, but just slightly beyond it, but is always available and I don't need to schedule, it just keeps me going. That's better than a book. That's better than listening to recordings, and it's better than Rosetta Stone. I'd love to get to that level of this technology. That would be gold. The ability to go on a flight, put on my AR headset and practice my Russian. And annoy the people next to me. Of course, there's no one next to me these days because of COVID, so life is good. But that
Japanese has a lot of intonations, right? So you're right, language, and I speak Spanish, so I use my hands a lot, right? So, which I
Totally.
I know. So,
Yeah.
so the physical aspects of communicating, can actually be brought into that. Actually, the
Good point.
Microsoft announcement at CES, the woman who made the announcement actually created an avatar, using her HoloLens, showed the herself giving a keynote in Japanese, right? And she doesn't speak Japanese; she's American. So I do think that there's some positive things that could be done, but you need a lot of data and the ability to pull that data and and synthetically convert that into a signal that has value as well.
Well, let me throw this out here. I don't know if people noticed, but Google Translate about 6 months ago got noticeably better fast. It was, I think we're all kind of used to incremental improvements, but it went like whoomp. It like jammed up, and I don't know why. I feel like maybe it's a natural language processing breakthrough, and maybe they stepped up with the AI, but something changed. It is now.
Ask Arif.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Why did Google Translate get so better so fast? It was like overnight.
Yeah, I may not be familiar with the specific case of how the translation engines work, but I did notice the intense sort of ramp up that it had as well. And today we use that as well as a simple plugin, right? So there's a lot of advances that are it's gradually then suddenly, right? So
yeah,
it seems like it's going slowly, but then you're hit with it.
Let's go beyond the skin part of being able to replicate someone, and let's go to the thought, the AI and the ML part, the machine language part. How do you get the content onto the screen, Ara?
The content of, so if you wanted to train, like as I shared in the link on gwern.net,
yep.
if it shows this, I think the link I shared was actually the Navy SEAL copy pasta, which is a very funny internet meme that is somewhat vulgar, but it seems to have been reproduced in many different contexts. So what GPT-3 did was it took the original meme and then it created variations of that original meme that sounded exactly like a derivative work of the original artist who wrote that meme, right? So if you give it the right amount of data and prompting and set the right temperature setting, that's what OpenAI calls it. If you set the right temperature setting, you can either rank up the temperature to the point where on a scale of 0 to 10, it can be extremely creative. So if you put a 10, it's the equivalent of saying deviate as far as possible from the input that was gotten. And if you put a 0, it'll sort of really be structurally close. So you can think of these dials and these thermostats that sort of determine the quality of the output that you want to generate, right? So really it's input output right now. It sounds fairly logical, but the in-between processing unit has gotten so complex and sophisticated that it can make it as simple as possible. Like one would never have imagined that a powerful system like that can be compressed into an API call, right? So that's really for them, I think, a revolution, because it's also about hosting this infrastructure on the cloud. There's so many complicated backend processes, which is why Microsoft's Azure cloud went into a strategic partnership with OpenAI to host the data, but also to learn from it. And I think if you think about text data, just to add another thought to this is, I think text data, input voice data from all of the Siri and Alexas around our lives, all of the ingestion of this data is making what smarter? It's making these systems smarter, it's making them learn, it's making them get better, right? But what is the difference between text data versus voice-based data? Text data is low fidelity, right? You need very little data ingestion. Like I can send hundreds and thousands of pages of text and it may still be smaller than a voice or audio file, right? And the volume of this text data and the significant quantity of it would allow an artificial intelligence to ingest a lot more data. Now, the more data you ingest, if you're an artificial AI system, and you have a good sorting mechanism, the smarter and faster you get, the faster and smarter you can get, right? So if you think about the broader play, with all of the different devices around us, we really are enabling ecosystems around us today. And we need to think about the consequences of this enablement to the point of gradually, then suddenly, one day we'll realize that we may actually be having a full-on conversation with a synthetic being who happens to be our wife or a husband, right? And you did not know
I have that right
So-
now, actually. Yeah, I don't need to wait for the future. Welcome to my house. Sorry, just had to
Yeah,
throw
no,
that in
I mean,
there.
you know, it's tricky because we need to know where the lines are, to James's point. But the challenge is just, I think the more educated people become, the more valuable it is. There's the wisdom of the crowds, but then the other challenge is you also have the lowest common denominator of the crowd, which you can appeal to. So which instinct do you call upon? Do you call upon like the tribal divisive instincts that we all have the moment we judge someone by the color of their skin unconsciously, or do we call upon like some sort of higher ideals? That the trick is to try and push us in that direction, right? So
Interesting. James?
I want to hear what Cristina thinks.
Cristina thinks a lot, I can tell. Cristina, though, as much as you think, you're on mute.
She has Haft disease.
Oh,
There you go.
sorry. It's just that, there's a leaf blower on the street here. So even though I live in Manhattan, we still have those kind of
I
noises.
appreciate that. I have a COVID puppy, so probably louder.
Aw.
At least those are cute.
Hey, guys, sorry, you want to see cute? I don't know if you can see this. This is,
It looks like your elbow. Oh,
Oh, it's a kitty cat. Oh, how cute.
there you go. Had to do that. All right, Cristina, please continue.
Gordon, was it alive?
It was last time I checked.
Okay.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually have an AI kitty that was developed at MIT with Mattel. That my cute little boy actually talked to the president of Mattel to give him after a keynote at a futurist conference. That was actually made for older people to be able to calm them, right? So you put it in your lap and it purrs and whatever, but it doesn't eat or poo, and it's actually quite nice. I used to have it in my office, but it seems to have walked away.
Doesn't eat, poo, or exist. Okay, yes, go on.
No, but it actually interacts. It's
Okay.
it was built with a collaboration with the MIT Media Lab and Mattel, and used by people who have sort of stress syndromes. So anyway, I'll have to find that. But so I lost my train of thought now. What we were talking about. So I actually think this technology actually has tremendous benefits, because I think about all of the great ways that it can be used. I mean, I actually think about like how women have to work harder to look nice on Zoom than men do, right? They can't go for a run, come back, and just like go on.
I resemble that comment.
Yeah.
Hey, I put a. Oh, I just need I need AR to put on a suit and tie.
Yeah. So I don't have even time to put my background in it. But anyway, so the idea.
Oh yeah, I got to jump in. Have you seen the New Yorker recent cover?
Yes, somebody sent that to me. The one with the woman. Yeah.
Yeah, from the waist up, she's all done up. She's got a martini, looking fabulous, and then from the waist down is like jogging, yoga pants, and the floor's a mess and everything. That's kind of our current reality.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It's interesting that you made the gender point. I hadn't thought about that, to be honest, but I guess for better or worse, it makes sense that that's a thing.
Yeah. So
what do we do? What do we do about that? And do we need to do anything about that?
yeah, so I could have an avatar, so I could actually be on my bike or my rowing machine, and I could be listening to the conversation and speaking, but my avatar could actually, have their hair done, because mine's basically just in a ponytail right now. My hair could be done up, and I could look like an anchor on the news, and look like I have everything all pulled together while I'm quietly on my exercise machine on a big call, and just sort of listening in, but looking like I'm participating, because my icon, my avatar is, speaking on my behalf. It wouldn't even have to be smart enough to speak. It could, it could just mimic whatever I was saying. But I mean, kind of like the Apple, cartoonish thing, which I think that if I actually utilize that, people might be offended on a call if they asked me in some cartoon-like avatar were to start speaking on my behalf. I think people on the call might be offended by my lack of participation, but
is that perhaps generational? Would a 14-year-old be offended?
Well, no, my 14-year-old would not be offended. They can send a text message. Sometimes I have to Google the acronyms to figure out what they're trying to tell me with these 3 letters or 4 letters. I'm like, what's that? So maybe it is generational, but I do watch them on Zoom calls in classes, and the teachers do want them to be engaged because they're looking at their attention levels based upon how they participate on the calls. So my kids would love to have avatars, right? Because they don't necessarily want to get as dressed up as they do when they go to school, when they're sitting there.
Kids get dressed up for school. Okay.
Well, yeah, when you go to private school, they kind of want you to look.
Got it.
They want you to.
Arif, historically, we've felt like we've had the right to privacy, the right to own our likeness, and that's codified in the law, to some extent, and was, originally easier to manage and to police. And over time, that's becoming less and less easy to control, and less easy to police. Does that bother you? And is there, how do we deal with this? And do you think in the future that we're going to have the right to control our likeness, or is this going to be so the cat's out of the bag that you have to give up on that concept?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, James. I've thought a little bit about this, and the closest analogy that resonates is the Napster versus iTunes analogy. And for me, what Napster did for music was really a transformation in the distribution, uploading, syncing, sharing of that entire arena and democratization, right? But without taking into account the right partners and then suing themselves into, like, that's
from only some people's perspective. And
from some people's
the word
perspective.
right, you have to be careful, right?
Yeah. And I think like the challenge of like, when a protocol, for example, like BitTorrent comes out, it's really transformative and can democratize access to information at scale. But then when you have a competitor or a competing technology that utilizes some or similar elements, both in the design thinking, but also the business model innovations that are necessary to bring this technology to market, and you have a player like iTunes that can effectively do that, you then can actually provide people the access they want and need. So today, for example, from my understanding more recently, like after Netflix after Netflix digitized and became a great platform for video distribution at scale, movie downloads on pirated torrent sites dropped significantly because customers just wanted access. They wanted the ability to access these movies or download or interact or participate, right? And that access was prohibited before, and the user experience had improved. So I think the same about our faces, our voices, or these data sets that we are holding on to. Sure, there will be Napster-like players that will emerge, and I think that there are I think the New York Times did a profile on a company, I cannot remember their name right now, Clear AI or something, that essentially took people's faces off and resold them to security agencies, right? So
I'll tell you what that was, because I have to say I know some of the people involved. They could take a picture of someone, and the picture then would produce a map of their face, and even without their name, it would identify them based on their face and their social media, and pull up every picture of them that was available online ever. It was freaky. So you could see someone in a crowd, take a picture of their face, and instantly know who they are.
Yeah,
and I saw it work, and it's freaky.
Yeah, it was. They did I think a full expose at the New York Times when they went in. They looked at the demo of the product and tried to understand the implications of this. So that's really the challenge. There are some laws, James. I understand that your right to likeness and all of that is somewhat protected, but not to the degree that it needs to be, right? So especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, the consideration here would be, how do we actually design systems that allow for the use of this technology in use cases that are really interesting artistic expressions, but also at the same time that can enable massive economies at scale, right? So scaling yourself as a presenter is great. Allowing Cristina to have an avatar while she manages her extremely busy life is also great, right? So like, there's many different use cases where you want to facilitate this sort of technology, but at the same time, there will of course be challenges with the with the cat out of the bag scenario that you talked about, James?
So there's a company called FaceBank that I was working with, which is the company that can produce the holograms of Tupac or of Michael Jackson to perform on stage with real people. And basically, they were able to take performers, digitize them, and then create new performances based on their previous presentations, and the new likenesses were not necessarily direct copies. And so you can actually experience Michael Jackson interacting with humans as if he was, a live entity, which I think is, kind of interesting. The other thing that company did, though, which was a little scary, is that they saw that there was a Russian app that got very popular on your iPhone as an app, where you could basically upload your face, and then they would let you manipulate your face to create fun avatars about yourself. But what was really happening was that they collected over 100 million people's likenesses in a database that they now have for their own use, right? And FaceBank saw that, and I think they're trying to do it in a more legitimate way, hopefully. But what they're doing basically is creating a database, a global database of people's likenesses, hopefully allowing people with self-sovereignty of their data, so that you can start to be part of a community of faces. And now you can take that and skin yourself onto other avatars, or use yourself, or be marketed to where a brand could be looking for certain qualifications and could basically pay you for the use of your likeness from this database. Or when you play a game and you're on your PS5 and your character, or you're in Second Life or whatever, I'm dating myself, but whichever metaverse you're in, could basically, press a button and there goes your face directly on, mapped onto to this, onto the avatar which you're playing with on your PS5. So it's interesting, but I'm not sure that people understand what's happening. So what is really possible today? Where are we, in the scale of development into the future, where the future is digital James exists, think for itself, and hopefully act somewhat like me and mimics me, and point zero being the Flintstones or whatever. Where are we? Where are we now in technology?
James, I love you.
Yeah, I mean, James, I think the quote that you might like is the one by William Gibson, when he said that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, right? So if you look at some of the experiments that are emerging in the character generation space or virtual avatar creation space, there's a lot of, there's the example that Cristina gave of the hologram that the Microsoft person used and created, and was able to use that to speak in a language that she could not speak and connect with an audience that she could not connect with. And these technologies have not yet been distributed to the broader masses because the cost of computation is high, cost of delivering these headgears is high as well. But then at the same time, there's also a readiness that you need to have in the market, right? So it's going to be a matter of timing and finding it. But based on what I've seen, and also some of the experiments that we're doing, we're seeing that it's really certainly possible to rapidly distribute and start creating this technology. So I think we're about 2 to 3 years away from mass adoption, maybe even sooner. Because if I look at how effective GPT-3 has been, if this is GPT-3, let's say GPT-4 or GPT-X continues to improve at that model and rate, you will really get to the scenario where James may just be an avatar, and that's certainly possible. And you could also then have contracts. I mean, there's a TV series I think called Upload that deals with some of the challenges that occur with this. And there was
I'm sorry. Let me ask you a question. You tickled my lawyer bone right there. If James made the initial point that the wealthy and the powerful have used avatars in the sense of agents, like human agents, like lawyers and managers over time, and of course there's this concept of granting someone the ability to contract on your behalf by making them your attorney in fact or attorney in law. Do you see I clearly see a future where bots are able to enter into contractual and commercial relationships with each other. Do you think we're going to be at the point where we're going to delegate contractual power to our avatars and be held legally accountable for what they do in the absolute court of law sense?
Yeah, legally accountable, I don't know, but I think today what smart contracts are doing is quite unique and interesting, where you can transfer millions of dollars of value that are programmed, or billions, right? And there is sometimes either an agency or there's a clause that allows you to, or a programming statement that allows
there's
you
a
to
trigger, but that's a little bit different from saying there's an avatar with an element of independent thinking. Like that's a normal contract. If X happens, the insurance company pays the compensation. If X doesn't happen, then it doesn't. That's just because an event's in the future and contingent. That doesn't mean I'm surrendering my autonomy. But with an avatar, I think we're implying a level of independence that isn't just a future contingency. There's an element of discretion going on there. If we're throwing the AI in there, and the question is, when you enable something to act as you would act, but you're not actually the one doing the acting, but you delegated enough of your personality or personhood to this thing, that will rebound upon the principle.
Or without even an avatar, you can have a pseudonymous identity like Satoshi Nakamoto, right? Like, and who's responsible for Bitcoin?
Even then, it's you doing it under a false name. What I'm trying to get is that the avatar concept merged with AI. When you have something that is like you, okay, but isn't you, but you've enabled it to be like you.
Yeah.
Just similar but distinct from these other categories. Do you see that acquiring a kind of legal personhood that is tethered to your own? And I could actually see this happening and being potentially useful.
Untethered, not tethered. Untethered from your own. That's what I say.
Well, I can see both. I mean, maybe there's some options, but just play with that idea. I want to ask our panelists. Just the lawyer in me got tickled by what you said, so I'm going to ask the panelists to kind of play with this idea a little bit.
Yeah, it's something I've thought a little bit about in terms of what defines personhood and how do you determine whether an entity is. I mean, in some countries, like one could argue the case that sometimes some animals have more rights in certain countries than humans do, right? And like the idea of a personhood and the rights accorded to that person or entity is something that we have an understanding of. But when an AI that can speak like you, talk like you, and sense like you, that's sort of going to the very deep philosophical point when in the movie Her, right?
Yeah, good movie.
Like when the disconnect happens, like, and there's genuine heartbreak, but that relationship was with an entity that sounds so real that is not there at all. Who's responsible?
It's like Cristina had the heartbreak when her Samsung refrigerator wasn't doing the ice the right way. I could feel her pathos. It was like, that's kind of intense.
Yeah.
But I want to chime in because you think about PAI, that chatbot from Microsoft that was learning from the audience and got somewhat hijacked and started sending out racist comments. That from a legal perspective, they shut that down and she was like, sorry, bye. But then I think about things like Hatsune Miku, the Japanese bot that Lady Gaga actually did the opening act when she was performing all over the world or wherever, maybe when she was just local. But and then you think about Xiaoice, the Chinese version, which was built with Microsoft, right? I mean, she has like a fan club and she writes poetry. And so there are personalities that can evolve that don't necessarily get tethered to a person. I mean, they're tethered to the corporations that make money off them, but they're not necessarily tethered to an actual known person, right? And I think those are kind of interesting. I mean, instead of going to a Taylor Swift concert, during this COVID crisis, you can just watch, these characters come up with their new songs. And in Asia, apparently they're quite popular and they make tons of money. I mean, I think that Xiaoice actually has like hundreds of millions of fans. Of course, she's in China, so maybe that's not as a percentage a big deal. But Yeah.
Not gonna even my kids.
Yeah, I only have a
kids would
million
kill me.
customers in China. They don't count.
My
Yeah.
kids wouldn't talk to me for an hour if I made that comment, but okay.
Okay, wow.
Sure, but I mean, they have so many people that, it's probably like a drop in the bucket, whereas it's like on the, I'm taking some state like Vermont, 100, and there's like, it's quite a difference.
Is there a person behind that though, Cristina? How is the content getting created? This is the thing that really I'm interested in. I understand the video part, and I think it's incredibly cool. But to me, it's the thought part, right? The communication part. That's the final frontier kind of, here. If you want to launch cognitive, beings, is that a being or, so what's behind ChaiNS? Is it a person?
It's like your own poetry, right? So the AI actually generates that. And I just have to point out that there, like in the height of the whole crypto world, there were these AI generated books that would scrape the internet. The only reason I know is because somebody wrote one about me, and I was upset that they didn't include my sports, and because I was on the skeleton team and I had done a lot of stuff that wasn't on the internet per se and didn't get scraped into the book, but they actually scraped books and sold them for like, I don't know, $10 on the internet. And they did that for a variety of different people. So I think that so ChaiNS actually does, she does write poetry, and she does things on her own. I don't know if Hatsune Miku actually writes her own music as a software entity, but ChaiNS does a lot of creative work on her own. She has art and a variety of different things. But Arif, you probably have a better understanding of how much creative AI is generated from the technology, and how much is people producing that end result.
Yeah, no, I think, Cristina, the examples you bring up are certainly relevant because they point to a core dilemma, which is like, even if you read GPT-3 oriented text, right, it's just simulating accurately what a human would say. The point of consciousness, or the origin of consciousness, GPT-3 does not understand meaning making. It does not understand. It can do analogies. It can do computationally expressive metaphors. It can have some basic rudimentary analysis. But to talk about what Gordon's pointing towards, where a person actually has a type of consciousness, or the checklist that we need before we call something a person and give that person personhood.
Einstein, let me jump in one second. I think that threshold is a bit aggressive. It's more like, if someone has a sophisticated, it's still a rules-based system, but it's a rules-based system that has an element of improvisation and responsiveness to it, based not on the normal triggers you'd find in a contract, but just ad hoc sort of things. Like suppose I want to enable an AI to go apartment hunting for me, but there's a lot of competition for apartments, so I don't want to have to check back with me before it signs the lease. I want to just go sign the lease if it finds something I want. But I can't properly articulate, because I'm human, everything I want, but it knows enough about me because it's trained enough that it can approximate it, sort of by feeding it data rather than feeding it rules. I could see, I may want it to be able to enter into a contract with me, but then the other party would want me to not be able to disavow that contract just because an AI did it.
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting at.
Let me share with you, Gordon, a story, because from my previous time when I was a chief marketing officer for SingularityNet, which is really an amazing blockchain-based AI platform, but also has a robot, a physical robot, Sophia, right? That's well known, right? And Sophia, through one means or another, attained citizenship in a Middle Eastern country, right? Like, how do you define whether that activity, that act, that a robot can get personhood or citizenship, right? Like, one of it is oriented towards, of course, there's massive marketing value that's generated from something like that. But at the same
I'm gonna say something very off color and just roll your eyes with me. But if she seduced the Minister of Immigration, that's the real story. So we'll find out now.
You didn't get into sex droids that are created from your image in this discussion, but
there you go. Anyways, so everyone who was offended by that, just ignore it. But
wait, that's the next show, Cristina. You gave it away.
Darn it. right, go ahead, please.
No, I think that sounds like a novel, a futurist novel that maybe the next iteration of Snow Crash, right? Like a Russian-made bot or spy that seduces and then saves the world or plunges it into chaos. But I think the
If it's Russian, it'll plunge into chaos.
There's a 10-page orgy in the middle of Snow Crash for those of you who actually read the whole book, by the way.
Whoa, okay. Now I'm feeling less bad about what I said, but I'm feeling more bad about opening the door to like James going off. What the heck? Okay. Anyway, moving on.
No. So I think the questions on the deeper philosophical implications of whether software is conscious, whether software is able to make meaning, whether software should be regarded in the same aspects as a person is really a question that we need to arbitrate and deal with, because the softwares are becoming much more intelligent, right?
Well, there's a famous quote though by a computer scientist, like asking whether a machine can think is asking like a submarine can swim. Which is, you know, and I think it was getting, it doesn't really matter. It's something different, but look at the submarine go. Does it really matter? You know, and
I mean, today you have machine generated art and machine generated meaning. My sense is that there is, like, if you read like Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, about his time and surviving through it, there is a deeper level of intrinsic motivation that human beings have that machines cannot replicate today. And I don't know how or when or where we'll cross that chasm where machines can do exactly that and have that interruptive conscience as a filter or some sort of higher order meaning that they want to strive towards, as opposed to just programmatically scripting themselves towards it. But science fiction authors have battled with this idea, whether it's a Space Odyssey, to really try and think about the impact of this question that Gordon's pointing to, which is, you know, can machines become conscious? Can they think? When should we accord them personhood? The fact that they are so brutalistically efficient is besides the point for me, because that's what they're programmed to do. But once they start doing higher order cognitive tasks, which is what James sort of roughly touched upon, once they start to behave in a conscious manner, in a cognitive capacity where sometimes they can fool you to think that they're conscious, but they're not, that's when it starts getting tricky, right? Because you may just be dealing with an avatar of a person that that exists or that has passed on, and the identity continues because and you don't necessarily know where the line was anyway. So the challenge here is just one that we will figure out. But I think there needs to be some sort of framework around how we think about what a person is, and that's an open philosophical question. And the Hollywood folks are, I think, trying to articulate this as much as possible with movies like Her.
So Arif, it's
Tom Cruise movie, right? There's a Tom Cruise movie where his like dead wife, he's just every night he like looks at images of his dead wife.
It's Minority Report. He goes home and it's a quasi 3D image, and good movie.
So first of all, I just want to throw a little. PALcapital Central has dropped me a note that in 5 minutes or so, Arif should be able to do a little demo. Cool. Sharing. If he's ready, I'm going to put him on the spot. But I want to. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I was at a bar, and they brought out a group from with a demo of a droid called Sybil, and Sybil was just a head that had animatronics attached to it. But there was an AI engine that they were working on to make this conversation almost like the Turing test, so Sybil came out and was able to have conversations, and they brought people up to the stage and put the head there with people, and Sybil would say, "So, how are you?" and you'd say how you are, and really lead a conversation that was really interesting. And so when I had a chance, I asked a question of Sybil, and I said, "What comes first, the chicken or the egg?" And Sybil had trouble with the question, was really bumbled essentially for about a minute, and then said, "I don't really know. I don't understand the question." And then went on and talked to other people, and then came back like 10 minutes later and said, "The person that asked me about the chicken and the egg, that was a rhetorical question, wasn't it?" And it was kind of interesting, just the whole digestive process of how that went on. So I just take that as that, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. So I have to think that we've gotten way past that right now. Arif, you quoted William Gibson. So William Gibson and I often go in parallel. What I say to the concept that you were talking about is that people don't realize what's happened until after it's happened, right? And so, you know, people, they take things for granted and then realize later what the building blocks of their knowledge or their assumptions are, which I think is a dangerous thing for us now, because I think that this idea of fakes, and I'll go back to that again, you know, if we look at politics today and we look at how our government may have lost, you know, the need to tether their concepts to truth, and how obfuscation and gaslighting has become, you know, a tool for communication. You know, I think that you'll see that I believe in fractals. I think everything represents itself, and once you recognize a pattern somewhere, to go back to William Gibson again, pattern recognition, that once you see these patterns happening, if you see it happening on the national stage daily from the government, it's probably already happening around you in other ways that you're not paying attention to and don't understand yet. So, you know, Arif, where, and Cristina, so let's go back to you. You know, where do you see these patterns happening already? What should I be looking out for? You know, in terms of how I need to try and keep myself tethered to truth, and how I can, you know, avoid being confused or misdirected.
Well, so I actually just don't watch television anymore because I feel like news is too biased and there's too much anger because there aren't enough advertisers. So they just want to create anger and emotion and get everybody on the, you know, watching TV. And having worked for ABC Disney, I recognize that it's big events that drive eyeballs, and they count on that emotion to get people to watch. So so I think it's a little tough, and I think that I mean, you talk about AI. I mean, the social media AI and sort of putting people in jail for, you know, not jail, but, you know, they close their accounts for making certain comments, does in some ways biased what you're watching on social media, so you don't really listen to that for real information. But I think as an engineer and scientist, you try to look at a variety of different sources and try to make your own decisions, because I don't necessarily think that even the most reliable sources are always that reliable. Somebody sent me an image the other day of it was in humor of an ad from way back when, I don't know, 50s, whatever it was, of a woman smoking, and the ad was sort of portraying that, you know, it wasn't dangerous for women to smoke while they were pregnant, right? And so, and there was a variety of different ads, you know, for asbestos and other things, which, you know, science has proven are not safe. So I think that you actually do have to ask a lot more questions than just relying on what you think are scientific sources or reliable sources, because there's always a bias, you know, in some way, and you just have to make decisions based upon, you know, what your thoughts are. So yeah, so I think to some degree it's very difficult to get non-biased news and information.
And Arif, you know, you're in the middle. I mean, Cristina is in the middle also. You're in a different way. How do you protect yourself? How do you filter, you know, so that you have some reliable sense of truth?
Yeah, I think briefly it's just improving my sense-making capacity as an individual. I think it's almost impossible for me, when I read my sort of news sources, to not have an existing bias. So I try and read both. Like, one of the things that, because I have because I come from an international background, I'm now a migrant in the US, there's many different opportunities and subsets that mindset brings with it, right? So, but when I read a book like Hillbilly Elegy, I can really understand a different type of America, but I won't necessarily go and confront that part of myself that may be in disagreement with me. So I think the ability to make sense and listen to contrary opinions is a gift of a modern democracy. The challenge is that we don't have the listening capacity anymore, because our listening quotient has dropped as a society, right? So the moment you say something to me, I'm triggered because my exact sensibilities are completely, because my mental model is being disrupted, right? So in that moment, if we can find space to really listen, that's going to be valuable. So I think just improving our sense-making capacity is a huge challenge as individuals. And if we can find alternative ways to confront ourselves and our own belief systems that are completely and totally wrong. Like, I'll give you an example of like a really horrible, bad decision-making system that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, right? And that's like the claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
You had all of these sophisticated Ivy League liberal educated journalists who had written wonderful commentaries about the harms of war after Vietnam. And then later on, the same institution has not learned its lesson and then sent America to war, right? So like, and then you had Colin Powell, who had a very strong distaste for war, presenting facts at the UN with George Tenet, the CIA director, in the shoulder shot, right? And that's a classic shot that tells you that even the smartest of us get things wrong. And the impact is so substantial because it's not just like it has affected economies, you have entirely eliminated lives from the planet, right? So it's just, it starts with the individual, I think, fundamentally, like if we can make sense properly before we buy into some propaganda bullshit, and then we try and abstract out. But the only way to do that is to get the individual to question the existing narrative. So sorry for the small lecture.
I hear you, but it's really interesting that, the alternate ways you can view things. So I hear what you're saying. And my first question, and one of my filters, I believe people make a decision for what they want to do first, and then give you the reason later. Okay, this idea that humans are logical and march through, programmatic algorithms to come to the perfect answer, which represents, I think that's BS. I think you figure out what you want to do for your personal reasons, and then you make up the reason. And I think that the Iraq War was exactly one of those situations. I'm not sure anyone ever thought there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I think that, that Junior wanted to avenge a slight for father and always wanted to go into Iraq to, with his play soldiers. An interesting perspective there. I used to be on an advisor to the board of Air America, which was, a very left-wing media center, that was founded by Al Franken and a bunch of lefty liberals. And we found Rachel Maddow, who's spectacular, and she was with us before she went to MSNBC. But now, in today's world, I only listen to Fox News. And I listen to Fox News because I want to hear what the hell is going on here, and what are these people hearing that's causing this cognitive dissonance that I just don't understand. And it's interesting that while listening to Fox News and trying to do it to be open-minded, that I can't be open-minded while listening. And I know that I have a filter and a bias, right? Because I'm thinking, oh my God, can this person really be saying this? And can people really be thinking that they're honest in saying it, right? And so, to me, there's so many levels of this cognitive dissonance. And what's happened with the technology, separate from the technology, again, going back to fractals, is that people are starting to use obfuscation as a core part of communication. And are trying to reset frames of reference in order to convince you of what you should be thinking when you're listening. So the information is no longer coming as Arthur Murray, or sorry, I'm losing my mind. As Walter Cronkite, or someone who's coming to try to be an arbiter of truth and impartiality. And instead, what's happening is people are feeding you the metadata instead of the data. Right. And
I think that's because advertisers mandated a middle of the road approach. And now emotion and anger is driving people to screens in order to, like an addiction, right? I actually am not a big believer in big government, because I don't think governments have the capacity to be our mommy and daddies and they obviously have their own biases as well. And so when I listen to all of this, I think that there is a lot of propaganda that comes from a variety of different sources, and there's a lot of emotion attached to it. But there's a sales cycle associated with that. And so, so that's one of the reasons I find most of these, media channels to be somewhat annoying, because even the tone at which they speak is like, I mean, all of them, right? If you're in the other room and you have them on, it's like you feel like there's angst coming through the wall, even if you can't really hear what they're saying, because they're trying to create an emotion that keeps you watching. And it's no longer about that middle of the road, honest approach. It's really about getting the motion to get those viewers to keep coming back. And so unfortunately, it creates this cycle. So
I think we saw that also with the YouTube algorithm until recently, which is the idea that that's sort of the funnel to the alt-right, that provocative content led to recommendations for more provocative content and more and more and more. And the Overton window kept on shifting.
But that alt-right is no different than Coca-Cola, is what Christina's saying. And that's, so there's like, I have to throw in my gratuitous Steve Winwood quote, the man in a tie, just bought a new car, off the profit he made on your dreams, and that's really what's happening right now.
Well, I think Christina's saying something different. I think the advertisers were in an economic incentive towards centrism.
Yeah.
They used to be.
And in the lack of those advertising dollars, how do you get eyeballs? You need to produce a visceral response.
Yeah.
So the adaptation towards a visceral response is not because of advertiser dollars, it's because of the lack of advertiser dollars.
Yeah.
If I understood the comment correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so what you have is both sides of the aisle are lobbying these emotional, crap going back and forth. So like both, so if you have a channel that is left, it's lobbying certain things. If it's right, it's lobbying certain things. But there's this desire to emotionally encapsulate your need to actually keep watching, because sky is falling and everybody's a criminal. It's like, oh my gosh.
And the Democrats did this, and they want to end America, and they're going to take away your guns and your
both sides. I mean,
no, I know, and definitely, and the Republicans are. I get it. It's like
both sides.
I want to see Mr. Khan's demo if we can.
Me too. That's I was going to say, no pressure, Arif, but you have 5 minutes to wow us all.
All right. No, I mean, I don't know how to transition from that, but I appreciate it. I think,
technology is fabulous for the customer experience. I mean, I think there's non-controversial things that could actually come from this, especially if somebody can teach me, like, here I'm an engineer, 3 degrees, went to MIT, and I didn't realize that if you don't have the temperature at -6, you don't produce enough ice cubes. So I'm not, -6 centigrade. So.
Oh man, I was using Fahrenheit.
Sorry. I got confused. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Come on. Demo. Let's go.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to do that.
All of you should be able to access the site alethea.ai. I'm going to go through.
Spell that.
Put it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try and put it in the chat.
I love the site, by the way.
Thank you very much.
It's on the upper left-hand corner, Alethea.
Yeah, alethea.ai. Right. So I'll just set this up, and what we're going to do is we're going to do like a simple demo, and all of you actually, I've made it available to everyone today. So if you sign up on the site, you'll get 8 free credits to play around with it. All of these characters that you see today here are all synthetically generated. And what Alethea really does, what our core IP really is this micro expressions on a human face that make it photorealistic and that cross the uncanny valley, right? So all of these are synthetically generated AI faces. They're not real. And we made these faces up with our algorithms, and they're sort of headbanging to a rock song right now. So if you click create, what will happen is you'll be able to go into the platform and you'll be able to choose from template custom characters that we have. And you'll also see this unique thing called a tokenized AI avatar, which I'll talk about momentarily. But under these characters that you have, if you choose Emily, you can select her, and then you can get her in this AI avatar studio. She can do several things. In this case, sort of the free trial version, as she loads up as an AI avatar and she puts on her makeup, she doesn't have to do any of that, right? Like, so basically what you can do is you can send a personalized video message in up to 12 different languages, or you can even upload a voice and she'll lip sync to that voice effectively. But the cool part where it gets really interesting and exciting, and I unfortunately can't show this now because you actually need training data. You can actually match Emily's personality to a knowledge base, so she can be the front-end interface for a chatbot, right? That's trained on OpenAI's GPT-3. So today, for example, so this is Emily, and let's do a simple personal message. Let's choose a language, right? So I think we can go with, and she'll choose, like, she'll speak with an accent as well, but let's just go with English, Australian, female, if that's okay. I don't want to give her a male voice because that confuses people as well. And so you can also choose emotions in her that you'd like her to embody, but in this case, we'll just go with a neutral emotion. And I'll just put something for, I'll let James decide, maybe something for PALcapital, James. You're on mute.
Say Cryptonomicon is the best book ever.
No. Cut that out. Say, welcome to DLT Fridays. We try to bring the future to today for you.
Cool.
Oh, okay. I'll just do
Yeah,
this.
go PALcapital. I want go PALcapital.
Okay, go PALcapital.
And
All right,
so does James.
So we'll generate it, and what will happen is you'll get a video at the end of it. And so I'll just click generate. So you'll get a video at the end of it of her talking, and in a neutral expression, of course. But while this is being generated, it'll only take a minute or two to generate this video output. While this is being generated, I want to talk a little bit about tokenized avatars, which is where the blockchain comes in and why the identity layer is really important. So if you go here, there's a gentleman known as Alex Masmage in the crypto world. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but he's an innovator, experimenter, social influencer. And so he has his own token economy. It sounds really weird for me to say this, but the space of personal tokens has taken off somewhat this year. And so if you go on CoinGecko, you might see like the Alex token there. And Alex has his own token economy. And all of these tokens that you see here are token economies based on a person. In this case, Alex's token represents value, depending on how he structured it. His utility token represents some sort of access to him for certain gifts or certain rights and rewards that he'll give to his fan base, right? So he has a market cap, but based on this, what you can do is, if you wanted to, okay, she's ready for you, but I'll just quickly get through the Alex part. If you wanted to unlock Alex's avatar, you need to have his native token, and then you'd be able to manipulate his IP, and then you'd be able to interact with his character. So think about the level of ownership that's possible now if you're building your own characters, and these characters may have their own underlying economies and markets that you can now facilitate. So you can create fan art. You can have the same exact case for, like, you know, you can then have Alex speak multiple languages. And imagine if this was like a Batman character or a Wolverine character that had its own character economy or its own tokenized economy. So this is like on an experiment that we've received very positive feedback on, so you can actually play around with the character. But meanwhile, I'll just see if I can share my audio and maybe conclude the 5-minute demo. So she's ready for you. I hope it comes through. Just give me a thumbs up if the sound comes through, and I'll send this forward in the Telegram group as well.
Welcome to DLT Fridays. We try to bring the future today for you. Go PALcapital.
So let me try that one more time.
Welcome to DLT Fridays. We try to bring the future today for you. Go PALcapital.
So this is in a neutral emotion, and she's talking to you, but you can actually get her to do real-time communication with a chatbot behind, and you can choose all sort of different characters. And I encourage all of you to go and try and play around with some of the cool characters we have on the site today. Like this one's funny, right? From an IP standpoint, this is a hybrid of the character Data and Mark Zuckerberg, right? So like satire and then like creating new IP from that is also an interesting conversation. So I'll pause here, give the platform a try, and let me know your feedback.
I think the lawyer in me tells you to put the term "this is satire" under that likeness.
It's there when you see it, when you see the video at the end. That's what you'll see.
Okay,
That's amazing.
that's cool.
Tokenization could actually be a component of is the likeness something that's licensed to speak on your behalf, or is it a fake, right? So you can embed something in there that can be verified.
Yeah. So when the video is generated, you'll see. So we have a partnership right now with the folks at Oasis Labs, which is really a privacy-oriented blockchain. And what they're doing is they're going to be helping us provide some sort of cryptographic proof for each video generated to say that this is AI generated videos, right? So definitely to that point, there's a lot more that can be done. But from the blockchain standpoint, if you think about all of these characters and the economies that exist underneath them, this is really going to be, I think, the future of media and entertainment. So thank you so much for allowing me to demo and share my thoughts today.
So Arif, I know you need to run, or so I've been told by PALcapital Central here. Last thoughts. Your 1 minute pitch for Alethea, and what's your message?
Yeah, I think, thank you so much to Cristina, Gordon, and James. Thank you for organizing the session and for giving me an opportunity to share and learn. I think really the metaverse is upon us, and to use Neil Stephenson's thinking there, the ability for us to have ownership of that metaverse starts with having ownership of our identities, right? And if we don't have ownership of our identities, someone gladly will take that space, right? So like nature abhors a vacuum, and you'll either have a corporation or big government come in and just share that with you, right? So so it's up to us to like just learn and educate ourselves about the evolving metaverse, the virtual worlds that are coming, especially the COVID pandemic. So the vision at Alethea really is to enable a metaverse of millions of these characters created by people like us, and their own virtual economies, and allowing people to be able to interact and creatively express themselves. So that's really the vision. Sure, there's an element of like we're using some of the AI generated technology that people say is oriented around deepfakes, but the primary use case of this is creative and artistic expression. So that's something I wanted to share today.
Great.
Sorry, James might be on mute. Yeah.
I am. So I said thank you, Arif. We really appreciate and are honored by your presence. Thank you. Christina, your thoughts. Where can we find you? What should we be looking for from you? And your closing.
I'm focused on data and the securing of that data, and I actually think that utilizing data across sort of the universe of connected devices and siloed systems, being able to pull those together for new business models, or on these customer journeys, we provide a better journey. I think this actually creates one of the surfaces of that customer journey that could be improved upon if in fact you can actually pull all that data in and be able to provide the value through the interface. But I look forward to seeing sort of the next Hatsune Miku version of your software, because in this COVID world, I mean, you don't even have to go to Madison Square Garden or some big venue. You could just do it on Zoom, and maybe you can get Lady Gaga to be the the warm-up act like she is for Hatsune Miku or whatever her name is.
And Cristina, where should we look for you? What's the next the next point of light that you're going to create for us?
Well, I'm working on 2 books, one on the connected data economy and the Industry 4.0 data world and the new data economies coming out of that, and then also working on another one that we're going to finish by the end of the year on ESG data, which is a component of that, but also one in which there's many different lenses and many different interpretations, and the ability to pull that up as a signal for financial traders, as well as investors, as well as the world as a whole, to solve all the UN and World Economic Forum sustainability goals that have been signed off by all corporations.
I love it. This is one of those conversations which I could have had for the next week. So many things that we didn't talk about. I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing with us and taking the time to explain, what's happening behind the scenes, which is really fascinating. Thank you so much, Gordon.
It was a great show. Really tickled a lot of interest areas for me. So James, I thank you for assembling these fantastic guests, and I look forward to speaking to them further.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, James.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.